We are talking about Renaissance art and the effects it had on society at the time and still has on global society today. We're going to talk about four major components of the Renaissance art as a whole. The first one is the era of art before, during, and after the Renaissance took place. The second is the styles of art used and created during the Renaissance. The third is the culture in Europe during the time and how it spread. And the fourth is its impact on today's society and art.
First, we're going to talk about the era of art before, during, and after the Renaissance took place. The Renaissance refers to the era in Europe from the 14th to the 16th century, in which a new style in painting, sculpture, and architecture developed after the Gothic, although a religious view of the world continued to play an important role in the lives of Europeans. A growing awareness of the natural world in the individual and collective humanity's worldly existence characterized the Renaissance period. Derived from the French word Renaissance and the Italian word Renascita, both meaning rebirth, the Renaissance was a period when scholars and artists began to investigate what they believed to be a revival of classical learning, literature, and art. For example, the followers of the 14th century author Petrarch began to study texts from Greece and Rome for their normal content and literary style. Having its roots in the medieval university, this study, called humanism, centered on rhetoric, literature, history, and moral physiology.
To better understand the era of art, let's briefly go over what the art and culture scene was like before the Renaissance took place. The Middle Ages was right before, also known as the Dark Ages. The Italo-Byzantine style was popular during this time in Italy. The Dark Ages refer to there being so little advancement in human development and inventions, as well as culture, arts, and science. The end of the Black Plague sparked the start of the Renaissance as people started looking forward to more prosperous times. One of the first ways this hope showed through was in the arts, mostly taking place in Europe, as not all the world had been developed yet. The transition was pivotal in human advancement. The art, however, wasn't just paintings. There were also breakthroughs in sculpture and architecture. Inspiration was taken from ancient Greek and Roman architecture, including pillars and stone details. Historical buildings built during this time period include the Sistine Chapel, architected by Giovanni de' Dolci and Baccio Pontelli, the Palazzo Pitti in Florence, Italy as well. The statues and sculptures from this period were mostly depictions of naked men and women as well as soldiers in uniform. They all had representations of different situations and had a meaning or a story behind them.
Secondly, we're going to talk about the styles of art used and created during this time period. Renaissance art, paintings, sculptures, architecture, music, and literature produced during the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries in Europe under the combined influence of an increased awareness of nature, a revival of classical learning, and a more individualistic view of man. Scholars no longer believe that the Renaissance marked an abrupt break with medieval values, as is suggested by the French word Renaissance, literally rebirth. Rather, historical resources suggest that internet in nature, humanistic learning, and individualism were already present in the late medieval period and became dominant in the 15th and 16th century. Italy, concurrently with social and economic changes such as the secularization of the daily life, the rise of a rational money credit economy, and greatly increased social mobility.
Next, we're going to talk about the culture in Europe at the time. In the 1500s, Europe left behind its medieval past and faced new early modern challenges that would continue into the modern period. These included the creation of new religions, the discovery of new people and places, and the growth of a middle class that held power without noble birth. Most people lived in small villages or towns, and the majority of the population was engaged in agriculture. The houses were typically small with 1 or 2 rooms and made of wood, wattle, or daub. Wealthier people lived in larger, more elaborate homes made of stone. Society was still recovering from the Black Plague and returning to normal life. The Black Plague was the last part of the Dark Ages, and the Dark Ages had lasted roughly 1,000 years of little human advancements, ending around 1450. The Dark Ages were important because they gave rise to the Renaissance period and its focus on cultural advancement for humanity. During the Dark Ages, humans faced famine, disease, and war, and the demise of the government. But when the Renaissance started, the population was becoming wealthier, which led to an increase in trade and travel and the spread of new ideas. The rise in prosperity also generated an interest in education and supported the flourishing of the arts and promoted scientific discoveries and new inventions. Now that people weren't dying, citizens were more interested in gaining an education and advancing humanity. Some notable artists during the time included Donatello, Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Michelangelo, and some famous paintings from the time included the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, the School of Athens, the birth of Venus, and the creation of Adam.
Lastly, we are going to talk about its impact on today's society and art. Renaissance means rebirth. And during this time, Europe left behind the fixed ideas of the Middle Ages and created the beginnings of the modern world as we know it. The civilization of ancient Greece and Rome were rediscovered, inspiring and interest in classical learning, which challenged medieval beliefs and ideas. The population was becoming wealthier, which led to an increase in trade and travel and the spread of new ideas. The rise in prosperity also generated an interest in education, supporting the flourishing of the arts and promoted scientific discoveries and new inventions. Perhaps the most important of these was the printing press, which enabled books to be printed rather than handwritten and allowed the distribution of information to a much wider audience than ever before, further fueling the clamor for more knowledge. Italy was the birthplace of the Renaissance. It's important as a trading center with many coastal ports on the Mediterranean Sea had created a wealthy society whose money helped establish Italy as a place of learning and culture. Important universities were set up, including one in Padua, which had a large medical faculty where anatomy was taught. Anatomy was also important in Italy due to the many artists who worked there, employed by wealthy Italians to dedicate their houses with paintings and sculptures. They wished to recreate the lifelike images produced thousands of years earlier by the Greeks and the Romans. Artists as well as doctors studied anatomy and carried out dissections to understand the workings of the body in order to create a more realistic portrayal of the human figure.
This is all about art during the Renaissance period.
Peace out!